One of the biggest myths I think we've all ever learned in school was that the American Revolution was mostly about taxes. You hear it all the time. It was just rich merchants upset about paying taxes. Really? If that's true, then how do you explain thousands of ordinary farmers, craftsmen, laborers, and families risking everything against the most powerful empire on earth? People don't usually volunteer to fight the British Army back then over a 3% tax hike. No, there was something much bigger going on. According to Murray Rothbard, the American Revolution was truly a people's revolution. It wasn't just led by a handful of elites, it was supported by the overwhelming majority of the colonists. And honestly, that makes perfect sense. You don't defeat the greatest military power in the world at that time unless ordinary people are willing to feed the soldiers, house them, fund them, and even fight alongside them. But here's what I find even more fascinating. Modern historians often try to force us into a false choice. They'll say the revolution was either about lofty ideals like liberty or it was about economic self-interest, as if those two things can't possibly go together. If someone steals your wallet, are you defending your property or your freedom? I'd argue it's both. That's exactly how the founding fathers saw it. They didn't separate liberty from property rights because they understood something we've largely forgotten today. If government can arbitrarily take your property, then your freedom isn't very secure either. To our founding fathers, liberty and property wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a unifying principle. Now, Rothbard takes this argument even further, and I think this is where things get really interesting. He argues that governments and ordinary people are often motivated by very different things. Think about it. Politicians, bureaucrats, special interest groups, government contractors, they spend every single day thinking about expanding political power. That's their profession. More regulations, bigger budgets, more influence, more control. And when they justify all of that, well, ideology often becomes a very convenient public relations campaign. History is filled with rulers claiming they're acting for quote unquote the common good or national security or the public interest. Yet, somehow, the politically connected always seem to come out ahead. Funny how that works, huh? Meanwhile, ordinary people are busy living their lives. They're raising families, running businesses, working jobs, paying bills. Most aren't waking up every morning studying tax policy or government spending reports. So what finally gets regular people to stand up against political power? Well, according to Murray Rothbard, it isn't simply losing money. It's ideas. It's when people become convinced that something deeper is wrong, that justice itself is being violated. That's why revolutions require an ideology. People don't leave behind the comfort of everyday life, risk their fortunes or even their lives just because of an accounting dispute. They need to believe they're fighting for something that's morally right. And here's where intellectuals play an enormous role. Now, before you roll your eyes, yes, I said it, intellectuals. Throughout history, there have always been what Rothbard calls, quote, court intellectuals, end quote. These are the academics, experts, and opinion makers who explain why the government needs just a little more power, just a few more regulations, just one more emergency. They're the ones that say, just trust us. But every so often, a different kind of intellectual comes along, someone who's willing to challenge power instead of serving it. During the American Revolution, writers like John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon, through Cato's letters, helped spread a powerful message. And that message was this: government naturally seeks to expand its authority. Liberty requires constant vigilance, and citizens should never blindly trust political power. Imagine how radical that sounded in the 18th century. Actually, imagine how radical it sounds today. Those ideas spread across the colonies like wildfire. Farmers read them, merchants discussed them, ministers preached them, taverns debated them. It wasn't propaganda in the modern sense. It was literally persuasion. People voluntarily embraced these ideas because they matched what they were already experiencing under British rule. And that's another point Murray Rothbard makes that I think deserves more attention. Many historians have dismissed the colonists as paranoid conspiracy theorists. They believe the British government was deliberately centralizing power and undermining colonial liberties. Well, what if that were right? History suggests they largely were. Sometimes what gets labeled a conspiracy theory is simply an accurate description of political incentives. Power, by its very nature, tends to seek more power. That's not cynicism, that's history. That's the facts, ma'am. When I step back and look at the American Revolution through this lens, I don't see a mere tax revolt. I see something much, much bigger. I see millions of people recognizing that political authority was gradually eroding both their economic freedom and their personal liberty, and therefore deciding they had had enough. That's why I like Rothbard's interpretation, and that's why I think it remains relevant today. Whether we're talking about 18th century Britain or 21st century Washington, D.C., the central question never really changes. Who controls whom? Do individuals exist to serve the state? Or does government exist solely to protect the lives, liberty, and property of free individuals? As a libertarian, I think the founders, at least many of the revolutionaries, understood that answer remarkably well. They understood that government exists only to protect the lives, liberty, and properties of the people. The American Revolution wasn't simply a fight against one king. It was a declaration that legitimate government must always remain subordinate to individual rights, that the bigger the government got, the smaller the individual's liberty became. And maybe, just maybe, that's a lesson worth remembering every single time someone in government tells us they only need a little more power for our own good. Because history suggests that liberty rarely disappears overnight. We're seeing the culmination of that today. It disappears one, quote unquote, reasonable expansion of government authority at a time.